Beneath the calm surface of official history, there are cracks, hairline fractures where the light of truth never reaches. Inside those fractures lie stories too dangerous to survive the telling. Experiments buried in ice, documents sealed beneath layers of steel, and voices that echo through corridors where clocks never ticked. In the ruins of forgotten wars, memory itself was weaponized. Nations rewrote the evidence, carving silence into the margins of victory. Yet every sealed archive hums faintly, as if remembering. When the world slept beneath the illusion of peace, the shadows moved, cataloguing what could never be confessed. Some say these files were burned, others claim they were buried, alive, waiting, whispering through static and frost. What remains is neither myth nor history, but something colder. The trace of design, the pulse of unfinished machinery, the heartbeat of secrets left breathing in the dark. Chapter 1. The Vanished Convoy of Operation Solstice. In the winter of 1945, as the Eastern Front dissolved under the relentless advance of the Red Army, the Baltic Sea became a graveyard for retreating German forces. Amid the chaos, a convoy departed from Swinemünde on February 15th under the codename Operation Solstice. The Kriegsmarine Manifest listed it as a standard evacuation flotilla carrying personnel and material to Norway, but later declassified fragments from the Bundesarchiv tell a more complex story. A signal transmitted from the destroyer ZT9 at 2300 hours referenced cargo V7 and a secondary directive labelled Kaelstein. The transmission was brief, followed by static. No subsequent messages were received. The convoy vanished within 48 hours of departure. The official German record marked it as lost to Soviet submarines, but Soviet naval logs from the Baltic Fleet make no mention of any engagement in that area during those dates. The Allied intelligence community took immediate interest. British intercept stations at Scarborough recorded anomalous Enigma-encrypted bursts from the Baltic on February 16th and 17, using cipher keys not seen in any other Wehrmacht transmissions. Bletchley Park's decrypt team labelled the source Raben Netz, a name that appeared nowhere else in German communications. The decrypted fragments referred to transit complete, biological material, secured, and Eagle route sealed. The term Eagle route later surfaced in a post-war OSS file connected to the relocation of scientists and classified research to neutral territories. By 1952, all known references to the intercepts were removed from the UK National Archives. Survivor testimony was scarce but persistent. In 1948, a Norwegian fisherman named Lars Henriksen reported seeing a black convoy moving silently through fog off the coast of Bornholm without running lights, escorted by what he described as a larger vessel with no flag. 2 days later, wreckage washed ashore, splintered crates stamped with the Reichsadler emblem and serial numbers beginning with WPR7. The local police filed a report, but British occupation authorities confiscated the debris within 24 hours. The documentation was sealed under a Foreign Office directive marked X2145. In 1963, a Soviet trawler named Kola Star reportedly dredged up a steel container bearing German markings from the seabed near Bornholm. Crewman accounts, later gathered from family members, claimed the container emitted a chemical odour and was embossed with the warning Nur for transport, nicht öffnen. Soviet Naval Command classified the discovery immediately, and the crew was reassigned to separate ports within a month. Western intelligence heard of the incident through intercepted correspondence between the KGB's Baltic Directorate and the Ministry of Defense. The file, referenced as Object 54 Bornholm, disappeared from Moscow's archives after 1970. Historians have since attempted to reconstruct the purpose of Operation Solstice. One plausible theory links it to the remnants of Germany's Biological Warfare Division, Institut für Seuchenbekämpfung der Wehrmacht, headquartered in Posen. In January 1945, as Soviet troops advanced, reports confirmed that experimental samples and equipment were removed from Posen and loaded onto trucks headed north. The Institute's lead scientist, Dr. Emil Kruger, was officially declared missing that same month. American records from Operation Paperclip mention Kruger's name among those considered for recruitment, but the entry is crossed out with a single red line, annotated, unconfirmed, likely lost at sea. A partial document surfaced in 1991 from the US Army's European Command Archives, titled Evaluation of Enemy Medical Research Assets, EMRA. dated March 1946. It contained an annex labelled Subject Operation Solstice, KR-21. Most of the annex was blacked out, but one legible line read, "Cargo classified under Category V7B, Hazardous Organic Material, Refrigerated Transport." The accompanying page bore an order signed by Colonel H.R. Franklin, directing that no recovery attempts be made pending interagency review. The review never occurred, and by 1948, the IMRA project was quietly closed. Satellite mapping conducted by NATO's Hydrographic Division in 1977 revealed an anomalous trench formation off the Danish coast, roughly 2.5 kilometers long and 40 meters deep, consistent with a scuttled convoy. Divers sent in 1978 under the codename Poseidon Survey retrieved fragments of hull plating identified as Kriegsmarine design, along with a bronze identification tag reading Z39 Maschinenraum. No cargo was found. The official NATO summary stated the ships had likely been destroyed by minefields or self-scuttling to avoid Soviet capture. But the survey commander, Lieutenant James Morrissey, later told a colleague the dive team's instruments had malfunctioned repeatedly within the trench and that Geiger counters registered faint but consistent radiation levels. Morrissey's subsequent transfer to the US Naval Reserve occurred less than 6 months later. By the early 1980s, renewed interest in the operation arose after declassified CIA materials hinted at Soviet recovery efforts in the Baltic during the 1960s. File fragments referred to Project Obelisk, a Russian initiative allegedly investigating residual biological contamination from the war. The same file included a brief mention of German sample containers, possibly V7 series. Analysts cross-referenced this with Bletchley's earlier decrypts, identifying cargo V7 as a consistent phrase. The report's conclusion read simply, "Potential continuation of pre-1945 research lines confirmed. Recommends surveillance of Baltic retrieval operations." Local legend in Swinemünde persisted. Older residents spoke of trains arriving by night during February 1945, guarded by SS personnel wearing protective masks and unloading sealed metal drums onto naval trucks. One retired dock worker, interviewed in 1987, recalled overhearing an officer refer to Solstice orders and the doctor's cargo. His testimony was dismissed as unreliable due to inconsistencies, yet he accurately described the destroyer insignia of Z-39 decades after its destruction. Modern German researchers revisiting the topic have struggled with missing or altered documents. Archive logbooks list the Solstice file as returned multiple times under different custodians between 1950 and 1975. But no return signatures match existing personnel records. When journalist Anke Vollmer obtained temporary access to microfilm labelled Reichsmarine Operations, 1944-45 Forn, she discovered that the reel numbered 97A contained only static frames and a handwritten tag. Removed per BSTU directive, the Stasi's involvement was never clarified. Speculation continues that Operation Solstice was not merely an evacuation effort, but an attempt to move biological warfare research into neutral or allied territories as leverage for post-war negotiation. The timing aligns with Reich directives encouraging the protection of technological assets vital to future defense. Evidence also links several surviving members of the Institute to later employment in East German and Soviet medical laboratories. In 2004, Polish divers exploring the Baltic floor near the original coordinates found twisted remains of a hull section engraved with the numbers V7B. Radiation readings were negligible, but sonar scans revealed a larger structure buried beneath sediment, metallic, box-like, and sealed. Before excavation could begin, the Polish Maritime Authority suspended the permit, citing heritage preservation concerns. Privately, one diver claimed that within the silt, he saw the outline of a symbol resembling the Reichsadler and the letters KARU. Today, Operation Solstice remains one of the most enduring mysteries of the war's final months. Every attempt to reopen investigation has been hindered by missing files, contradictory statements, and sudden reclassification of evidence. The Baltic holds its silence, and in it perhaps lies the last trace of cargo V7, the unknown legacy of a convoy that never reached its destination. If the cargo did survive, it was never meant to surface. Whatever it was, the sea, like the archives, has chosen to keep it buried. Chapter 2. The Black Radio of Königssee. The story of the so-called Black Radio begins in the dying winter of 1944, deep in the Bavarian Alps. Hidden beneath the limestone ridges of the Berchtesgaden complex, SS engineers constructed a facility known internally as Sturmhorn, literally, Stormhorn. The site never appeared on official Reich construction registries, and its location was omitted from local surveys. Only one surviving blueprint, recovered from a collapsed tunnel after the war, bears the mark, Abt 6 Signal, Nachtleiter Project. The purpose of Sturmhorn remains one of the least understood episodes of Nazi communications research. The concept, pieced together from fragments of intercepted documentation, centered on extremely low-frequency transmissions, signals powerful enough to penetrate both terrain and jamming fields. According to post-war Allied debriefings of captured SS technical staff, the system could, in theory, communicate with submerged U-boats beneath the North Atlantic or transmit orders across continental distances without relying on conventional radio infrastructure. The leading figure behind the project was SS Hauptsturmführer Dr. Otto Reisinger, a physicist previously attached to AEG's signal laboratories in Berlin. Reisinger disappeared in May 1945, leaving behind only scattered log entries from January to March. Test unit oscillation within tolerance. Power conversion stable, subjective interference audible. The final note reads, frequency achieved, proceed at 0200. When US Army Signal Corps units arrived in the region during Operation Eclipse, their mapping patrols detected significant residual power lines feeding into a sealed cave network north of Königssee. Locals described a persistent low hum emanating from the mountains during the last months of the war, like thunder inside the stone. American engineers dynamited several of the entrances and declared the tunnels unsafe, officially listing them as munitions storage sites. Yet an internal US report dated June 17, 1946, Preliminary Technical Appraisal, Facility Sturmhorn, classified the discovery as experimental ELF transmission installation, incomplete. The document included a recommendation for full excavation. No such excavation occurred. By 1950, much of the site had collapsed due to flooding, and Allied intelligence attention had shifted towards Soviet atomic developments. The name Sturmhorn faded into obscurity until a brief resurgence in 1979, when an engineer for Siemens, Rolf Meinhardt, conducted a hydroelectric survey of the Königssee basin. His sonar equipment registered unnatural echo patterns consistent with metallic structures beneath the lakebed. Meinhardt filed a report with the Bavarian Ministry for Waterways, but was found dead weeks later, the victim of what authorities termed a boating mishap. His colleagues noted that his notes and equipment had vanished from his home. Following Meinhardt's death, West German intelligence quietly reopened the Sturmhorn file. Internal correspondence from the Bundesnachrichtendienst, BND, describes a residual emission anomaly detected in 1981 by NATO signal monitoring near Berchtesgaden. The signal repeated at intervals of 43 seconds on a frequency well below audible range, recorded as a low electromagnetic pulse. The BND codenamed it Echo 43. Attempts to triangulate the source failed. US monitoring. Stations in Bad Aibling corroborated the readings but attributed them to atmospheric interference. The true extent of Sturmhorn's design came to light when a retired US Army technician, Sergeant William Kerr, released copies of classified microfilm in 1992. The microfilm contained translated German memoranda from late 1944 referencing a Resonanzfeldgerät or resonance field device. The documents noted that tests conducted at Königssee resulted in acoustic disturbances and psychophysical effects on personnel, including nausea, vertigo, and auditory hallucinations. One technician wrote, "After 3 minutes exposure to 17 Hz harmonic, entire chamber vibrated. Light fixtures shattered. Instruments unreadable." Allied scientists reviewing Kerr's release suggested that the equipment may have generated subsonic frequencies capable of inducing physical resonance in solid matter, technology decades ahead of its time. Local records indicate that in 1946, American engineers dismantled an underground turbine chamber beneath the nearby Obersalzberg complex. While officially designated for hydroelectric generation, diagrams recovered later showed wiring consistent with high-voltage oscillators. Witness accounts from local laborers claim that soldiers loaded 2 large cylindrical components onto flatbed trucks, covered them with tarps, and transported them towards Salzburg. The convoy's serial numbers were logged as AFCE 46-1191 and AFCE 46-1192, but the receiving depot never recorded their arrival. The component's destination remains unverified. In 1991, when the US Army Europe Archives briefly opened select post-war engineering records, researchers searching for Sturmhorn references found that entire folders labeled ELF Transmission, Königssee Sector were missing. In their place was a single page marked Signal Persists. Source indeterminate. The notation was dated 12th September 1985 and signed only with the initials RDK. Attempts to identify the author failed. No personnel with matching initials were assigned to Army Communications Command at that time. That same year, an amateur radio operator from Salzburg, Karl Vogel, captured faint low-frequency disturbances on a custom-built receiver during a thunderstorm. The pulses repeated at roughly 43-second intervals, the same rhythm recorded a decade earlier by NATO analysts. Vogel's logs were published in a small Austrian radio journal, where they caught the attention of independent researcher Hans-Dieter Koch. Koch began a private investigation into the Sturmhorn legend, interviewing former Wehrmacht engineers and local residents. In one interview, an elderly electrician claimed that, in April 1945, he had been ordered to disconnect the black cables before the Americans arrive. When Koch asked where the cables led, the man replied, "Into the mountain, where the water sings." 2 months after the interview, Koch's apartment was burglarized, and his audio tapes were destroyed. By the early 2000s, renewed interest came from a joint German-Austrian archaeological survey intending to map wartime bunkers around Berchtesgaden. Using ground-penetrating radar, they detected an extensive subterranean complex beneath the northern ridge of the Königssee Valley, corridors extending nearly 800 meters, arranged in a radial pattern around a central chamber. The chamber's depth and shape matched descriptions in a 1945 engineering memo titled Resonator Hall. Excavation was abruptly halted when the regional government cited environmental safety risks. Unconfirmed reports suggest that subsequent drilling produced unexplained electromagnetic interference that disabled equipment and erased stored data. Today, no official confirmation of the Sturmhorn facility's function exists. Every archive query yields redacted or missing documents. Yet the persistent whisper of Echo 43 continues to appear in radio monitoring logs from the region. Amateur operators claim that during heavy electrical storms, a low oscillation can still be heard near the lake's north shore. Faint, rhythmic, unchanging. Geologists attribute it to seismic resonance from underground water movement, but those familiar with the old files recognize the number, 43 seconds. Residents near Königssee continue to report odd phenomena. Fishermen tell of compasses spinning erratically and metallic echoes rising through the water at night. Hikers occasionally hear a vibration underfoot, too low to identify but felt in the chest. Some blame old munitions, others say it's the mountain breathing. And somewhere beneath those slopes, sealed behind tons of rock and silence, lies what remains of Sturmhorn, an experiment conceived in desperation, abandoned in secrecy and still murmuring in the dark, a forgotten frequency from a war that refuses to end. Chapter 3. The Forgotten Front of Operation Iceworm. In 1959, at the height of the Cold War, the United States Army Corps of Engineers launched what was publicly known as Camp Century, a demonstration of Arctic engineering buried within the Greenland ice sheet, 150 miles east of Thule Air Base. The project was presented as a model for polar living and scientific research, but classified records later revealed a second secret designation, Operation Iceworm. Its true objective was the construction of a concealed network of tunnels capable of housing mobile nuclear missiles within the ice itself. Officially, the program was cancelled in 1966 due to instability of the ice cap. Unofficially, evidence suggests that Iceworm's tunnels extended far beyond what has been publicly documented, continuing deep into an unmarked sector known to internal memoranda as Zone 9C. Zone 9C was never shown on official maps. It first appeared in a December 1960 progress report titled Project Iceworm Infrastructure Evaluation, under a section labeled Extension 9C, Research Sector Alpha. Most of the text remains redacted, but the legible portions mention retrieved metallic containers, non-US origin and Archival transfer to Polar AR. When the report was declassified in 1997, the annex detailing the container's serial numbers was missing. Two surviving engineers later, interviewed by Danish journalists, recalled an operation in late 1962 when US personnel sealed off one tunnel branch for 3 days under orders from Washington. None were permitted to enter afterward, and that section was subsequently flooded with coolant brine. Rumors within the Corps suggested that beneath Iceworm's cover story of missile mobility tests, a smaller group of scientists had been conducting recovery operations, retrieving cargo buried under the ice long before American arrival. One internal memorandum from the Office of Naval Research, dated February 1963, referenced legacy German material possibly transferred via Arctic routes. 1945. The note was signed by Dr. Leonard P. Kessler, a physicist previously attached to Operation Paperclip. Kessler's involvement lends weight to the hypothesis that Iceworm concealed an effort to locate wartime Axis assets, possibly scientific archives relocated north as the Reich collapsed. The roots of that theory reach back to 1944, when German weather stations such as Edelweiss the Send and Haudegen were established in the Arctic for meteorological purposes, and, some suspect, as staging grounds for future relocation. Soviet intelligence captured fragments of transmissions from those stations referring to Depot Frost and Operation Nordlicht. While dismissed at the time as routine logistics, later decrypts from British codebreakers at Eastcote revealed coordinates corresponding roughly to Greenland's northeastern coast. Those files were sealed after 1945, under the Special Intelligence classification, and never reopened. When Camp Century began construction, US engineers encountered layers of ice containing metallic debris inconsistent with natural geology. Some of the fragments bore stamped markings in German script and dates from 1944. The discovery was mentioned only once, in a February 1961 progress note by Lieutenant Colonel John C. Schuster. Foreign manufacture alloys recovered, possible pre-existing site. Recommend deep core retrieval. Schuster's note was subsequently removed from the project archive. By the following year, his name no longer appeared on Iceworm correspondence. The Danish government, which maintained nominal sovereignty over Greenland, was not informed of the project's classified dimensions. When fragments of the Iceworm documentation surfaced in 1995 under the US Freedom of Information Act, the Danish parliament demanded an inquiry. The investigation revealed that hundreds of tons of nuclear waste, diesel fuel, and biological samples remained trapped in the ice. Yet one entry in the Camp Century waste inventory stands out. Category Red, sealed containers, origin unknown, transferred to 9C Alpha, 14th of March 1962. There is no corresponding record of removal. A 1964 US Army photographic survey of the tunnels includes several frames labeled restricted sectors. In frame 72B, a blurred image shows what appears to be a steel door partially encased in frost, with the stencil F Alpha faintly visible above it. Attached metadata lists the camera operator as Sergeant Thomas R. Harlan. Harlan's service record ends abruptly in 1965 with a notation: discharged, medical evaluation. No cause is listed. According to later accounts by Danish researcher Erik Kappel, who reviewed declassified US Army Cold Region engineering files in 2002, certain Camp Century temperature readings recorded inexplicable heat spikes at depths of over 30 meters. Kappel concluded that artificial power sources had been operating in those lower chambers long after the camp was supposedly abandoned. In a 2004 interview, he stated, "They sealed something in there, something still generating residual output." 3 months later, Kappel disappeared while traveling to Kangerlussuaq. His field notebooks have not been recovered. Satellite imagery from 2004 revealed structural anomalies under the ice sheet near Camp Century's location, precise rectangular voids inconsistent with known tunnel designs. The images were released by NASA's ICSat program and quickly withdrawn after Danish defense officials requested their removal, citing national security review. A classified Danish defense command memo obtained in 2016 acknowledged evidence of foreign-built structures predating 1959 excavation. The memo was stamped "Do not disseminate US cooperation required." The persistent rumor within Cold War intelligence circles is that Operation Iceworm's secret sector was used, not only for missile testing but for containment. Notes from a 1965 Pentagon briefing on polar research recovered through the National Archives refer to hazardous cryo-organic samples. Though context is sparse, this phrase appears again in a 1973 environmental risk report prepared for the Department of Defense. The report warns, in the event of glacial melt, containment breaches could expose biological assets classified during polar operations. Some believe that those biological assets were remnants of wartime experimentation. A Soviet KGB defector, Yuri Andropovich, claimed during a 1980 debriefing that Soviet signals intelligence tracked US transmissions labeled Iceworm, retrieval phase 2 in 1963. The KGB believed the Americans had uncovered material related to German frozen pathogen studies, and that samples were transported to Fort Detrick under diplomatic seal. No corroborating documents have surfaced. By the late 1970s, the US military had largely abandoned Camp Century, but small maintenance teams continued to visit for ice stability monitoring. One technician, interviewed anonymously for a Danish documentary in 2015, described seeing a sublevel that wasn't on the maps. He recalled sealed corridors lined with frost-covered steel and air that smelled like ammonia and rust. When he asked his superior what the section was, the reply came curtly, "You don't have clearance for that. As climate change accelerates, Greenland's ice sheet has begun to melt, and the buried remains of Camp Century are re-emerging." In 2017, radar soundings detected new voids near the coordinates once designated zone 9C. Environmental teams sent to evaluate contamination reported elevated radiation levels and traces of synthetic polymers unknown in 1960s materials science. The US declined to comment on whether it would assist in cleanup, stating only that the site presents historical complexities. Today, Operation Iceworm occupies a strange place in Cold War memory, a failed engineering feat overshadowed by rumors of deeper secrets. The official narrative insists that it was a missile project abandoned due to environmental instability. Yet the scattered documents, missing logs, and whispered recollections suggest something older lay beneath the ice long before the Americans arrived. Whether that cargo was scientific, biological, or something else entirely, it was entombed in the frozen tunnels of Zone 9C, sealed away under layers of secrecy and snow. And as the ice retreats year by year, whatever was buried with Iceworm may soon be released, carrying with it the last breath of a war that refused to die. Chapter 4. Project Morgenlicht, The Disappearing Scientists. In the immediate aftermath of World War II, amid the chaos of surrender and the scramble for German expertise, Allied intelligence initiated the mass extraction of Nazi scientists through what became known as Operation Paperclip. Officially, the purpose was to secure advanced research in rocketry, aviation and medicine before it could fall into Soviet hands. Unofficially, a shadow network operated alongside it, an unsanctioned parallel known to only a few as Project Morgenlicht. Between 1946 and 1950, at least 200 German engineers and medical researchers vanished from Allied custody, leaving no trace in employment rosters, immigration logs, or public records. The earliest reference to Morgenlicht appears in a declassified OSS memorandum dated 2 December 1946. Subject: Technical Transfer, Group Morgenlicht. Status: Ongoing through Düsseldorf Corridor. Oversight: Combined Anglo-American. The memo was signed by Colonel William H. Traherne, who would later become the Deputy Director of the US Army's European Command Intelligence Division. No follow-up correspondence survives, yet cross-references in MI6 archive summaries mention a joint retrieval program for specialists in biophysical endurance and electromagnetic interface studies. None of those terms correspond to standard scientific classifications of the time. The paper trail dissolves into silence after 1947. Witnesses, however, provide fragments. One of them, a former US Counterintelligence Corps translator named Harold Jeffries, testified before a congressional review in 1974 that he had personally escorted a group of German nationals from the Frankfurt detention facility to RAF Fassberg in early 1947. Jeffries recalled the men being unusually pale and kept under constant guard, escorted by American and British officers. When he asked a senior intelligence aide about their destination, the answer was brief: Special Transfer, Project Morgenlicht. You didn't see them. Jeffries was reassigned within the month and barred from classified operations thereafter. Among the missing scientists was Dr. Friedrich Menzel, an electrobiologist attached to the Reichs Ahnenerbe-Forschungsstätte in Königsberg. Pre-war records show Menzel had been researching biomagnetic field manipulation under the guidance of SS General Wolfram Sievers. In 1945, he was captured by American forces near Lübeck. His initial debrief indicates a cooperative subject with extensive knowledge of stress resistance in extreme environments. A year later, Menzel disappears from custody lists. In 1949, a single note appears in the Air Force Technical Intelligence Archives. Dr. F. Menzel, reassigned to Project Oak Ridge, M12. Status: classified. No Project Oak Ridge under that designation is known. By 1951, both MI6 and the US Army Medical Intelligence Division purged files associated with Morgenlicht. A memorandum marked Joint Retention Order 118A ordered the consolidation and indefinite suspension of all documentation concerning Group M personnel. Curiously, this directive was co-signed by representatives from the British Ministry of Supply and the newly established CIA Directorate of Science. Whether this cooperation was routine or exceptional is unknown, but it effectively erased the official existence of over 180 individuals. Hints of their continued work emerged decades later. In 1983, a classified RAF intelligence assessment described unregistered electromagnetic emissions detected near the Harz Mountains, in the vicinity of a disused bunker complex known as Anlage Süd. The report compared the frequencies to early post-war experiments conducted at Fort Detrick involving human exposure to pulsed fields. A handwritten margin note added, "Matches patterns attributed to Morgenlicht personnel. Verify containment." Within 72 hours of the signal's detection, British military police cordoned off the site. Local newspapers reported it as an ammunition disposal exercise. Former East German intelligence archives provide another puzzle. A Stasi technical division file labelled Sonderakte Morgenlicht 86 surfaced briefly during the 1990 reunification audit before disappearing into federal custody. The file's inventory list mentions transmissions consistent with British origin biofield research and references a location near Verniger Road, beneath what had once been an underground chemical weapons plant. According to a surviving summary page, the Stasi believed Western intelligence had continued the Morgenlicht experiments under NATO supervision until the mid-1960s, focusing on neurological field adaptation, a euphemism perhaps, for something far less benign. One peculiar consistency across testimonies is the phrase Lichtkammer, the light chamber. Multiple witnesses recall hearing it during post-war interrogations or within recovered notes. A declassified 1947 field report from US Army Intelligence Unit 970 describes a sealed chamber equipped with copper resonant plates measuring 7 by 3 meters, containing restraints and high-voltage wiring. The report lists recovered notes in German referencing, physiological coherence in electromagnetic resonance, exposure. Every page of the annex was redacted before release. By 1960, public awareness of Project Paperclip had grown, but Morgenlicht remained entirely unacknowledged. Yet medical archives at the US Army Institute of Environmental Medicine reveal a cluster of research papers dated 92-94, authored by F. Menser and A. Dittmann, both pseudonyms, consistent with missing Morgenlicht personnel. Their studies involved human tolerance to induced magnetic oscillations, ostensibly for aviation research. The underlying data, particularly the use of German language annotation, suggest a lineage back to Ahnenerbe-era experimentation. The ethical implications were buried as efficiently as the documents themselves. In 1977, during the US Senate's MK Ultra hearings, Senator Walter Huddleston briefly mentioned a related biomedical program absorbed from captured Axis scientists in 1947. No record of further discussion exists. However, classified addenda to the hearings, unsealed decades later, include a single-page reference to the Morgenlicht transfers under the CIA's technical services staff. First-hand evidence remains elusive, yet scattered encounters persist. A former MI6 field operative interviewed anonymously in 2008 claimed to have overseen a small containment protocol in Harz in 1961. He described a bunker that hummed like a substation and a control room with heavy shielding, where equipment bore both British and American markings. When asked what was being contained, he replied, "Not a person, not exactly, something residual." You couldn't stand there long. Your skin would crawl. In 1998, British National Archives released a mislabeled folder from the Ministry of Defence under the heading Biomedical Storage, Heart Sector. Inside were 4 photographs of an underground corridor lined with rusting conduit and an empty containment chamber. Each photo was stamped Morgenlicht 1948. There was no accompanying text. The file was reclassified within days of its discovery. By the early 2000s, declassified NATO environmental records confirmed periodic radiation monitoring near hearts consistent with historical containment sites. The region was declared off-limits for groundwater drilling. No public acknowledgement linked these precautions to any wartime or post-war program. Still, every few years, researchers attempting to cross-reference the missing paperclip scientists with post-war scientific communities encounter the same anomalies. Men whose careers ended abruptly in 1946, only to have their research echoed years later under different names. Perhaps Morgenlicht was never an official program at all, but a convenient label for an amalgam of covert experiments scattered across Allied sectors. Yet the identical terminology in US, British, and East German files suggests deliberate continuity. Morgenlicht literally translates to morning light, an ironic title for a project born in the darkest remnants of the war. If the aim was to push the limits of human endurance or manipulate the body through electromagnetic fields, it was conducted beneath the layers of secrecy that shielded both victors and vanquished alike. Even now, in certain classified military medical indexes, entries remain marked See Morgenlicht. Their contents are sealed until 2075, and somewhere in the Harz Mountains, sealed behind reinforced doors and forgotten by official record, a small generator occasionally activates during power fluctuations, drawing current to equipment that should have rusted away decades ago. For those who have heard the faint hum echoing from the rock, it is said to sound like breathing. Chapter 5. The Lost Files of Operation Harpoon Shadow. In the early spring of 1944, the Royal Navy's Western Approaches Command began receiving a series of distressing reports from merchant convoys in the North Atlantic. Ships described phantom echoes on sonar, contacts appearing and disappearing at irregular intervals, suggesting vessels traveling without physical presence. Some commanders dismissed them as false readings caused by thermal layers or faulty ASDIC equipment. Others were not so sure. Within weeks, 3 Allied supply ships were lost under mysterious circumstances. Survivors claimed they had been struck by explosions without any visible torpedo wakes. The Admiralty soon classified these events under a new heading: Operation Harpoon Shadow. The codename appeared first in a memorandum from the Admiralty's Anti-Submarine Warfare Division, dated 3 May 1944. The document read, Enemy surface elements employing novel acoustic camouflage. Possible experimental class, Kriegsmarine Special Operations. The memo attached intercepted radio traffic from a German U-boat base at Kiel, referencing Project Wellengeist, Wave Ghost, a term never found in official German naval archives. British intelligence concluded it referred to an experimental unit, merchant vessels modified for clandestine attacks on Allied convoys. Their defining feature, an acoustic reflective hull coating and prototype self-propelled mines. Decrypted fragments from Bletchley Park's Ultra Intercepts mentioned a Taskgruppe Nebel operating under the 12th U-boat flotilla. Orders were relayed from Kiel to occupied Norway, directing them to commence Harpoon and Schatten test runs in the North Atlantic corridor. The phrase Harpoon and Schatten, translated literally, became Harpoon Shadow. Among the messages was one chilling note: no identification lights, no survivors. By late June, Allied escorts began reporting anomalous radar signatures, faint, intermittent and oddly symmetrical, as if reflecting off an artificial surface. HMS Keppel, a British destroyer, logged the following entry on 29 June 1944. Unidentified contact at 01:23 hours, bearing 280 degrees. Radar return inconsistent with known hull patterns. Fired star shells, no visual confirmation. Contact dissolved. Less than 40 minutes later, a Liberty ship in the same convoy, SS Malvern Hill, exploded amidships without warning. Salvage divers later recovered metallic fragments from the blast site that failed to match any known torpedo composition. After the war, when Allied intelligence combed through captured German naval records, they discovered partial schematics labelled Project W7, Reflectionshulle. The designs described hull plating composed of an alloy integrating synthetic polymers and nickel compounds, materials designed to scatter sonar signals and reduce radar reflection. The inventor's name, Oberingenieur Gerhard Kluge, appeared on only one page. His personnel file indicated he had been attached to the Kriegsmarine's experimental yard in Gotenhafen. Kluge was declared missing in May 1945. His last known assignment, supervising the launch of an unregistered vessel designated MS Widder II. In 1956, more than a decade later, a Canadian salvage team working off Newfoundland recovered debris consistent with German ship construction. Among the recovered items was a steel plate etched with the number W703. The fragments were sent to the Royal Navy Materials Laboratory at Portsmouth, where metallurgical analysis revealed an alloy with electromagnetic properties unknown during the war. The final report, filed under Admiralty Archive X401, concluded, probable advanced experimentation, origin German, recommend classification. Within months, all reference to the find was removed from the public index. Eyewitness accounts from wartime convoys add to the enigma. A former merchant seaman, Frank Dwyer, interviewed in 1967, described a black silhouette of a cargo ship sailing against the wind, completely silent. His ship's radio failed moments later, followed by a series of underwater detonations. The convoy commander recorded the incident, but omitted it from the final report at Admiralty request. Another account from a Norwegian sailor aboard SS Bamble Fjord recalled hearing a pulse, like machinery underwater, seconds before a blast crippled his vessel. Years later, retired intelligence officer commander Alan Verity privately confirmed that the Admiralty had established a special committee in 1944 to investigate what they termed synthetic vessels, their task to determine whether Germany had achieved radar reflective stealth through acoustic engineering. Declassified fragments of the committee's notes mention frequency layering, sonic misdirection, and a disturbing entry reading. Recovered sample indicates presence of non-ferrous polyalloy. Manufacture untraceable. Verity claimed the committee's work continued into the early 1950s before being absorbed into NATO's Scientific Advisory Group. Cold War files deepened the mystery. A 1962 memorandum from the U.S. Office of Naval Research, recovered through a FOIA request in 2003, referenced Project Reflex, continuation of W7 concepts. The attached summary credited post-war German contributions via Allied acquisition. Notably, the US Navy launched its own stealth research program at Carderock that same year. The line between captured innovation and unacknowledged legacy blurred completely. In 1974, a Norwegian fisherman trawling near the wreck site of SS Malvern Hill pulled up a rusted cylindrical object resembling a depth charge casing. Upon inspection, it bore the marking W7B, keel 44. The cylinder was confiscated by the Royal Norwegian Navy. 3 days later, Oslo newspapers reported a restricted recovery operation conducted under NATO supervision. All photographs of the object were seized, and the fisherman was later visited by British officials who advised him not to discuss the find further for security reasons. The sealed container was allegedly shipped to the United Kingdom for analysis. A single entry in the 1975 Defense Research Establishment log lists German cylinder sample, origin Atlantic, material exhibits residual radioactivity, handle under isolation. The sample was designated specimen 401HS. No subsequent mention exists. By 1998, a new round of Admiralty declassifications briefly opened the X401 file. Journalists who viewed the document before it was resealed noted that every page after the title sheet was blank, save for a single typed header, Harpoon Shadow, not to be disturbed. The absence of content only intensified speculation. Modern sonar imaging of the North Atlantic seafloor has since revealed a large mass, roughly 90 meters long, situated within an old convoy corridor between Iceland and Newfoundland. Its form resembles no known wreck. Divers have attempted access, but the area is subject to strong magnetic interference that disables equipment. A 2009 Danish oceanographic expedition reported electrical anomalies consistent with residual current along the object's hull. When they attempted to retrieve samples, Their submersible systems failed and communication was lost for 8 minutes. Upon resurfacing, data logs from the craft had been completely erased. In naval folklore, the legend of Harpoon Shadow endures. Sailors still speak of radar ghosts that appear on stormy nights in the North Atlantic, echoes without substance that drift across screens before fading into static. Most dismiss it as coincidence or atmospheric distortion. But among maritime historians and intelligence veterans, a quieter theory persists that one or more of the experimental vessels escaped scuttling, running dark beneath the waves, power sources dormant but intact, waiting in the deep. If those ships still rest on the ocean floor, they carry with them the last vestiges of a war fought in silence, an era when technology raced ahead of conscience, and when men sought invisibility not for survival, but for the perfection of secrecy. Operation Harpoon Shadow was never acknowledged, never admitted, and never concluded. Somewhere under the grey expanse of the Atlantic, the black ships of Tuskgrupp and Nabel may still lie, wrapped in their reflective skin, engines cold, their purpose long forgotten, but their presence never entirely gone. The sea remembers what the archives refuse to confess. The deeper you search, the louder the silence becomes. Folders marked classified are not meant to hide knowledge, they are meant to contain infection. Every erased line, every redacted page is a warning in disguise. The ghosts of unspoken missions don't rest in graves. They hum inside power lines, drift through old film reels, and sleep beneath concrete where nobody remembers the doors. Truth, once sealed, decays differently than lies. It seeps through archives like radiation, invisible but fatal to those who listen too closely. Perhaps the war never truly ended. Perhaps it simply learned to hide. Somewhere beyond the final blackout of history, the classified files still turn in their cabinets, whispering the same question across decades of silence. How much of what we call peace was built on things we were never meant to find?